everyone. Hello, dear future leaders from around the world. I'm Ekaterina from Future London Academy, and welcome to another episode of our leadership series. And today we have an amazing special guest, Kate Stanners. Kate is Chairwoman and Global Chief Creative Officer at Saatchi Saatchi. Saatchi Saatchi probably doesn't need an introduction, is one of the biggest global advertising agencies with offices across 114 different countries and with over 6,500 employees. Kate has been there since 2005, pushing great work and winning awards for Visa, EE, Guinness, Toyota, Carlsberg, to name the few. And before that, Kate set up a communication company called Boy Meets Girl, as well as has been a founding partner at a groundbreaking agency called St. Luke's. So would love to hear your experience. What was it like to be the only female creative pair at that point in advertising? And what actually was good about it? I mean, I can imagine there were things that were not so good, but what did you learn from that experience actually you then took through your career and potentially made it unique to your experience?
Oh, that's a big question. And it's a long time ago as well, by the way. So it's like, let's cast our mind back in a sort of time warp. But I honestly didn't think when we started, I didn't realize that it was anything unusual. So that was the thing. I think maybe that was utter naivety, but we kind of had a portfolio. We got ourselves a job, and I make it sound easy. I think we all know getting that first job is tough, and actually even the process of getting a job, you kind of learn a lot about who you are and what's required. It was more sort of, we started realizing that it was unusual was because of some of the rejections, and because I sort of speak to lots. Actually, my nephew, who has just left St. Martin's and is starting his career, he was devastated when he had a first knockback. And I said, okay, we need to sit down and talk, because the one thing you're going to have to learn is being knocked back. And I think that's what we realized in this first year out of college, sort of going round. We suddenly started understanding that there weren't many all-female creative teams around. In a sort of meeting a creative director, and he sort of said, we think you've got a great portfolio, love the work, but we've already got one of you. And we really didn't understand what he was talking about, because it was a massive agency. It was Y&R at the time, who were one of the really biggest agencies. And I won't tell you who he was, but he said, yeah, we've already got one. And we said, but aren't there 40 creative teams? And he said, yes, And then it slowly dawned on us that we were a sort of being seen as a niche. So I think, to your point, when you're saying, and I think in people's heads, they were going, have we got the sort of products that require that? I'm not proud of this either, but sort of we made a point of wanting to work on alcohol and beer and cars and motorbikes because of that. Honestly, rather pathetic, but we would hate if we were asked to do sanitary towels or makeup or so forth. But I think now I think I've come massive full circle. I think everyone should be about who they are, and being their voice is what I look for when you sort of form a creative business and a creative environment, and difference is everything. But I realized what we were desperately trying to do was to be the same as everyone else, which was utterly crazy. So we tried to sort of not be too young women in a way. It's embarrassing to sort of even say that, but and also I don't think we even realized we were doing it. I think in retrospect I could turn around and say, that was our behavior. We out-mailed the males in many ways. And it was probably that culture in the UK that was the ladette culture. I think we were probably the staunch components of it at the time. But I think, so it was seen as unusual. And I remember there were a couple of women that I just thought were phenomenal. Barbara Noakes, who was a founder of BBH with John Hegarty, just the most incredible writer, and Susie Henry, who set up an agency. And those were really the two women. And I didn't even realize that I'd got them in my head, that I didn't, again, realize that they had become important to me. I've never met them. And in fact, it was years after that I met both of them. And I almost curtsied when I met them. I was so in awe of them. But, I just sort of hadn't realized I was obviously seeking some kind of role model somewhere, and actually very rarely came across them. So that was our beginning.
I love it. And I also love how you talk about trying to fit in, because I think that's, especially when you're young, that's a very natural instinct to see, well, if you already look different like everyone, then maybe at least you can act the same as everyone else, or try to mimic what's going on around you, just to kind of fit in and make everyone accept you. And I picked up so many habits that probably I shouldn't have from being in an environment. And I studied also physics and math, so I was already used to being the only female in a room. So that literally from the age of 7, that has been the case. But I realized that also gave me a lot of perspective on different views and different angles. I always kind of had that split mind in my head of like, interesting. I can see that I am different, and I can see what everyone else thinks. And I feel like I can give a different perspective just because I clearly think differently. Do you feel like you saw the power that you had at that point as a female creative, or were you trying to kind of blend in and understand how everyone else thinks?
I think then, I love what you're saying, by the way, is your brain is a left-hand, right-hand brain that comes together, which actually I think so many of us as creatives are. There's that sort of logic and illogical sort of yin and yang that we wrestle with every day, that I think often shows up in the sort of people we are in the places that we work. And it's a kind of unique type of creativity. My little story is my wonderful first copywriter was the person who got me into this bloody industry in the first place. She stole my portfolio and said, right, I really want to go into advertising. I was going, I really don't. And so she got us, sent our portfolios off to BBH, and we got a summer placement there. That's when, so she got me into this. And then of course I loved it. And she was from Liverpool, and she said, you know what, 2 years in, she said, I'm really sorry, but I just don't like being in London. I want to go home. And I was, okay, now I'm here. But I ended up working with another amazing writer, Tim Hearn. So we met on a train, bizarrely. I mean, so this is a very unpredictable career, as you'll see. But yeah, we bumped into each other on a train, got talking, went to the pub, and became a creative team. I left where I was working, and we went and managed to get ourselves into an agency called Goldgreen Trott, which had an amazing creative director called Dave Trott. He still does the most incredible blog, so I always recommend that to people if they. He's hasn't really changed, but everything he says is really relevant as it was whenever he started to now. But the reason I say that is because I think it was there that I started getting a little bit more confidence about my own voice. It was quite a macho creative department. It was absolutely, had a sort of very democratic but highly competitive environment. So I didn't ever feel I was disadvantaged or advantaged. I felt that I was just me. And then I felt that I wasn't being I was just being Kate. I had my role there. And he used to come in, because I was quite a football fan and quite boxing fan. So he would come in and talk to me about football and boxing, and get me these books on different football coaches, and, say, I think you're the only one in this whole department that's interested in this. And then he'd say, I'll go and talk to, I'll go and talk to the others about fashion or whatever it is. So he thought this was highly amusing, that I had more male characteristics than the other males in the department. But I think it was, I just felt that I was able to be a bit more me there. And it just was just, you know what it is? It's just confidence, isn't it? And I think you're so right in saying it's sort of a maturing because when you think of yourself as a teenager, unless you are, you know, amazing, I think we go through those phases of not wanting to stand out, you know, and that awful phase where, I mean, this is my height, I'm tiny, but, you know, if you grow really tall when you're at 14, you don't want to be tall, whereas, you know, later it's amazing to be tall, but you know, it's that you sort of just want to be like everyone else, and it takes confidence and learning about yourself to start being yourself. And that just comes with age and experience. And if you as a leader can give people positive experiences, I think you'll get them to be themselves quicker. And that's what I hope, that you can do that, you know, if you create the right environments where people feel comfortable saying silly things, making mistakes, being a little bit, you know, not being scared of failure, I think you get an environment where people are more comfortable being themselves. You get a more interesting, diverse and creative environment, and you get happier people.
Couldn't agree more. And definitely happiness and creativity are linked. So definitely creating a happier and more relaxed environment boosts creativity and helps to come up with great ideas. You also mentioned Dave Trott, which is a legend and at all levels, an incredible thinker and creative. I suppose being around him, especially at the beginning of the career, I'm sure you were watching him closely, how he works, what he does, how he thinks. Do you remember anything that you learned from him as being a leader or this creative director that you potentially kind of took through your life and through your career with you?
Oh my God, there's loads of things, and some of them might sound quite outrageous actually now. But there were loads of things. One that I thought was a stroke of genius to the point of building your confidence was, you know, the day we were hired, which essentially we were total, you know, novices, really fresh learning. The first thing he did was say, now you're responsible for running a course for young people. We're like, oh my God, we are the young people. And he said, so you are now going to teach cohort. And actually it used to be, we used to take the people that D&AD used to run an amazing course, still do. In fact, D&AD run many incredible courses for young people. We used to run a course at GGT for the rejects who never got onto that. And he then said, right, you're in charge of it. So you think you're fresh out of college, really, you know nothing. And you're now being asked to kind of lead a course for six weeks, you know, setting briefs, reviewing their work, getting them. And I thought that was the most genius thing, because it instantly made you start assessing what you think is works, articulating it and building your confidence. So I thought that was a genius. I also thought, and I didn't realize he was doing it at the time, I was one of only one other female in this quite big creative department. And I think what he was doing is he was putting a different face as the first face that young people saw coming into the agency. And I've always done that. So I always put my young female teams or people that are from different backgrounds, people of color, to be the first face that students might see. Because if anything, we just want this business to be a business where people feel that they have a place. So I thought that was, I didn't realize what he was doing. It was terrifying as well, by the way, but probably learned like 10 years work in 6 weeks. I mean, the other thing that I think very much as you're talking about, his brain was extremely logical. So he kind of taught us to be planners. He taught us to really interrogate the problem and be quite brutal about interrogating what we're being asked to do. So even if we were given a brief, we would kind of work with planners, almost unpick it and start again. So he was really, really good at that, and he would get to something incredibly singular. He would then be rigid about you delivering work to it. and not deviating from it, and he'd be brutal about reviewing you. He also always talked at the time about, we're here to make work that gets talked about. So it's not about winning awards or whatever, it's work that gets talked about in pubs, in school playgrounds. At the time, there was not a social platform, but essentially, stuff that has social currency. And then finally, it was an environment that was extremely competitive. And I do think the balance for me is creating agencies that are nurturing and encouraging, but also have a bit of competition. I think it's healthy. I think there is, but it's that fine line of letting those two things exist.
And when you say competition, what did it look like, and what did it feel like?
It was pretty brutal. It was very visible. There were a wall which had your name on it. If you were with the last in, youngest, were at the bottom, and there would be 30 names on there. And then if you got a piece of work that he liked and reviewed it, you might find yourself coming in the morning, you might have skipped up one. If you got something in production, you might have skipped up 2 or 3. And so you'd find yourself in this really brutal environment. He would call a review every 6 weeks where he just pulled in all your work that you had being made. And then it would come out the office to say, okay, the bad news is he wants to fire everyone. The good news is, except you. But it's like, oh God, okay. So now you're now elevated to a really senior team when you've got it was just a bit crazy. But I think personally, I thrived in that highly competitive environment. I don't think it is for everyone, and I'm not necessarily advocating that extreme. And we all knew what we were signing ourselves up for when we did it. And unbelievably, there was almost this real sense of individual competitiveness, and yet a collective kind of sense of agency, and then being competitive with the rest of the industry. So it was quite an interesting dynamic that was created.
Wow, I love it. I've never heard actually about brutality of creative industry from that point of view. Interestingly enough, now that you've started talking about this, I remember that actually one of the first design company that I worked in also had a wall, and every week we had review. So but they would launch a brief every morning, and everyone needed to come up with an idea by lunchtime. The whole idea wasn't about the specific visualization skill or anything else. It was just the brutality of good ideas. And everyone who had to either print it out or draw it on paper had to be visual. And then it would be put on the wall, and the art director of that studio was brutal. He would just say, this is crap, this is horrible, this is awful, who came up with that, this is even worse. I suppose the silver lining there was, because you only spent the morning doing it, you never felt too attached to it or felt like it was personal.
I think that's actually another thing. I think that's really interesting, that that sort of process of, because I do think as creatives, one of the things we have to learn is rejection, because you kind of lay yourself bare a bit, because it's your ideas that you're kind of having to express, and then suddenly it's free for all for everyone to say their shit, and it's like, oh my God. But I love what you say, that sort of sense, because we do some of that, have open briefs where, that you kind of inviting a bit of freedom in terms of idea generation. And one of the things I noticed, I think particularly at St. Martin's, that they do as a sort of process is much more, you presenting your work to a group. Which I think is terrifying as a student, but because it's terrifying as a professional, I know. But I think that somehow getting over that, and I love what you say, if you've only spent a couple of hours on it, you kind of go, okay, I've always say to people, ultimately, what is brilliant about you is you will always have another idea. You've got that type of brain. So this is a bottomless pit where, it's a mine that you can keep mining. And it's not going to dry up. So always think of that talent.
I love this. And definitely we should bring more ease of feedback to I suppose teams, and I think that's a fine balance between creating an environment that people feel scared of criticism versus a competitive environment where everyone wants to try again and again and again and actually eventually get the praise. Because again, I remember when you would actually get the praise, because it was rare, very rare.
Yes, it's great, isn't it? Yeah. You know, and it's of value. You know, I think this is saying rarity is of value, isn't it? I mean, you know, sometimes you could be on up to 7 different projects and he would review them every day. Sometimes it would start being reviewed once a week, and then it would be when things he hadn't seen something he liked, it would go to dailies. And sometimes you'd be reviewing 5 different things a day. And I remember once working on something, I think it was a beer like Holsten Pils or something. And I remember at the end of the day, it was our 5th time in on the 5th different thing. And I just walked in and he just went, "Is it great?" And I went, "Well, what do I say to that? If I say it's not, you'll say, why are you coming in? And if I say it is, you'll say, no, it's not." He said, "Okay, Kate, you can only say that once. You can go out and come back tomorrow with something that's great." I was like, oh, God.
Oh my God, this is brilliant, brilliant. Well, it does prepare you for the reality of the world when talking about being a chief creative officer and being at CEO positions. You will hear a lot of very harsh feedback from clients, from CEOs and CFOs and other people who definitely don't want to soften it up for you and just want to say things as they are. So I think building up that character throughout years definitely helps. And you did it in various environments, and that's what I love about your story. You co-founded agencies, you work in agencies, you worked in different sides of companies. So can you tell a bit more about these different environments where you worked, and what was different about you as a person who had to look after the team in, let's say, a company like St. Luke's that was slightly smaller, but again had great ideas, versus huge organizations where you were founded versus where you're a hired person? What were your reflections on different environments where you had to lead people?
You know, I mean, St. Luke's was my first experience of proper leadership. You know, I think we set out as a group of people to very much be about a team. So it was never about an individual. It was never about, you know, there was a clue in the name being St. Luke's. It was a breakaway from, you know, the Barthel Bogle Hegarty. It was always about the collective. It was never about the I. And I think that was sort of, we firmly believed, we used to say we're co-owned, not co-run. So we were a very unusual ownership model, and much more like a partnership, which is more familiar with design or actually in the legal business, but hadn't been in an advertising agency. One of the things we did very early on was we said we would not enter creative awards. And that was, again, deliberate setting a sense of environment that we weren't chasing creative awards. We were there to do, because we felt we wanted us to be honest about the solutions we came up with our clients for our clients' problems. We didn't want to have a preset idea of what might be a direction to go in, because I think you can see that now when I'm sure lots of us sit on creative award panels, and you know stuff that has been made for an award rather than really made. And I think we didn't want that. So that was one of the things that was quite crucial to the environment we created. The other was we didn't have offices, and the only rooms we had were for our clients. So they were themed, like we had the IKEA room, which you can imagine had the IKEA furniture. We had the Radio 1 room, which was like a mixing, like dark, horrible studio, where all sorts of unspeakable things would happen at night. We had the makeup boots room, which was 17 makeup, which was like a teenage bedroom. We had Eurostar, which was a train, like seats and so forth. So we kind of had rooms that were for our clients. Again, that created a very different, so no one was more important than the client. And I think that for me was a real sort of sense, a shift in my understanding, my responsibility. So I think it was, creating a place that you wanted to be surprised by your work you produce. So what we would love at the end of the month when we shared work, that it was so different from one another, that we would learn from each other, that you would just sit next to someone who would be, you know, brilliant at one thing and you just start talking. So it was an environment that was very serendipitous in how it worked. Whereas I'd been used to working in a place where the creative team had a door, it shut, and you just sort of bounced ideas off one person. This was sort of like a sort of multiverse of chaos going on, and it was very chaotic. And I loved that. I found it a very nurturing place. That there was everyone had a voice. Everyone's voice was heard. There were forums that everyone's voice could be heard. So I think those were really extraordinary things that we did.
This is amazing. And I love the idea of different rooms for different clients. And it sounds, that's what creative industry was, where I wanted to work. I suppose that's what I imagined it should be, and I wanted it to be. So that definitely seems like a dream come true. But in terms of going back to the question of feedback, because you mentioned reviewing work, as we just discussed how brutal of a feedback you had to experience when you were establishing your career path, what's your current approach to giving feedback now that you are in a position of giving feedback, and how maybe it develops throughout years as well?
I love looking at work. I mean, it is still my very, very favorite thing I do. And I love reviewing work with teams. I think my approach has always been, even when you know it would be much easier just to go, okay, it's all shit, start again. I do spend time going through everything, and I always try and find something in there. I don't know if that just makes life. I usually think there is something in there. Sometimes it's a phrase someone said. It might not even be in the work they're presenting. It might be in the conversation as you talk, and make them feel ownership of it, even if it's something that's come out of that team dynamic. You know, I think things that have changed, or I feel having got, and I don't know if it's a transition from being a creative when your job is to, you know, almost be the machine that comes up with the idea and the solution, to being a leader. But what I do think is listening, really listening to what's being said. It might not be what's on the design or what's on the chart or what's in the deck, but listening to a conversation that kind of can happen around it, and then guiding that. So giving people a sense of ownership, because I think if people have a sense of ownership, even if it's, you know, that they will go away and make it theirs and have a sense of responsibility to deliver as well. And that was St. Luke's. We were very much about making people feel responsible. And it's funny, isn't it? No matter how, I think as a leader, when you're encouraging talent, one of the things you can do is not give them the sense of responsibility. Because it's easier to take that on yourself. And actually, I think people feeling the stress of not delivering, feeling the, you know, I mean, one of the most terrifying things I remember was the first shoot I ever did. And I knew that it was a huge, vast amount of money that the client was spending. And I just felt, oh my God, like I am responsible for coming back with all this imagery. It's just me. I just felt the weight of their business on my shoulders. But I think that's quite healthy to just really understand.
But do you think that there are people who thrive in that environment of responsibility and competitiveness and pushing someone to the edge? And I'm totally on that side of things. I love when I'm battling against the wall and I need to deliver it to tomorrow. That's like the environment where I thrive. But I also noticed that there are people who actually get completely overwhelmed in that environment and completely freeze.
Yeah.
As well. So how do you deal when you have different types of people in the team, those who actually can get completely shattered by pressure?
I think that's such a good point. I mean, I don't know I thought one of the things that happened in the pandemic that we are all, and I don't know if we have anyone here from China who, you know, I know you're still going through interminable lockdowns. One of the things I thought was quite interesting with a lot of creative teams that I work with, they actually said, because I hated not being in an environment where I'm feeding off as I say, serendipitous interactions, which I just don't think this kind of culture can do. It's kind of quite formula. It's it's diaried. However, a lot of our creative people said, I love it because I've got time. I have a moment which is organized, and then I go away and I've got time to really sort of work with my ideas. And a lot of us are introverts, and that is a way of where you get your energy. It's not just being quiet or shy, So I think I was really surprised by that, the amount of people that said, actually, it gave me space to just go away and think and work quietly. And I quite liked that sort of able to control my own environment a bit more. And I thought that was quite interesting. But I think you're right, not wanting to talk about football too much, particularly because of what happened the other night for England. Anyone from France on here? I've had to do several meetings with France today, and I've been very magnanimous. You'll be pleased to know. Thinking about a bench on a football team, you've just got different roles and different and it's either playing to people's strengths and that's as well as their output, but understanding what makes them tick and what makes them comfortable, you'll get the best out of them. If you are reviewing work, I found, sometimes I've been reviewing work with a team that just is really uncomfortable in a broader forum. So then I will make sure that we do that on our own and prep them so that they can then present to a wider forum, or, small things like that, but just getting to know people a bit, actually going for a coffee, going for a drink. And the one thing I think we have a benefit as creative leaders is you're often reviewing work. So you're with each other a lot. You spend time literally talking about work, which is highly personal, actually. And in doing that, you learn about each individual. And I always at least spend the first 15 minutes of any meeting, which bores the hell out of everyone, talking shit. So we all find out, who's just done what and who's cooked what, or who's been, because I think you just want to find, I think it's helpful if we all know a bit about each other.
Oh, I so agree with you. And I just, when you were talking about how by reviewing work and talking about work, we realize how much time we actually spend together and learn about each other. And I realized all my friends from any sort of job were from obviously designers and everyone who you work with, because you do spend time literally talking about things you're passionate about, which in this case is design and creativity. So even though you are doing work, but you just essentially spend time talking about things you like.
It is. And also I think in that environment, everyone is equal, because you will have, because people are bringing, and this is why I say people having the confidence to bring their own experience to the table. Some people have a kooky passion for a certain illustrator that I would never have seen, or everyone is learning. You never stop learning. Everyone can bring something to the party that is interesting or of interest, I think.
Love it. And I would love to talk to you, Kate, about the main topic, which is Chief Creative Officer. You are a Chief Creative Officer. So first of all, what do you wish you knew about the role before you became one? Someone could have warned you about or told you that would have prepared you better for your first, let's say, few months as a Chief Creative Officer.
You alluded to this before, which is, I've worked in so many different environments and in different roles. And I currently sit within the Publicis group within Saatchi's. And even within that job, I have probably 3 or 4 jobs sitting there just because I sit within this sort of network. But when I moved to Saatchi's, I was hired to be the Chief Creative Officer of London. And it was really different. And I can remember the fear of stepping in from, I'd been in small boutiques before. I'd really rejected this idea of going to a big agency. I turned the job down 4 times, and they were kind of persistent and convinced me that I was right for it and it was right for them. And I'm so glad they did, because I've adored every minute of it. But I think I was absolutely terrified. I hadn't stepped foot in the agency because it was all secret. I walked in to this very famous Charlotte Street that even taxi drivers knew. Everyone, has heard of Saatchi and Saatchi. And like even my dad said, thank Christ for that. You're finally working at an agency that hasn't got a stupid name. I was just like, thanks for the encouragement. And I walked in and there were 350 people in the reception looking at me. And I had to say hello and say what I was there to do. And I in that moment, the enormity of it sort of hit me with Jesus Christ, this is what leadership is. And I hadn't realized, and it was a very hierarchical environment that I have tried to spend years knocking that down and inverting that. But I found it really unusual coming from a place like St. Luke's, where we had totally sort of created a flat structure to be the sort of word that everyone hung on or waited for. And nothing happened until I didn't realize that was happening. I just assumed people would ignore me. And because, that's what we did at St. Luke's. And I suddenly thought, I said to someone, why hasn't that happened? They said, because you didn't sign it off, or you didn't do, I was like, oh my God, or you didn't say this. And it suddenly, I realized that you were sat at the top of something, of a machine. And I spent, the next 5 years knocking down each one of those walls. I mean, literally, I tried to knock all the walls down and they wouldn't let me. So, because the building would fall down, apparently. But it was a process of trying to sort of decouple that kind of structure to create an environment that I believed was less rigid and afforded more collaboration across discipline and capability. So in answer to your question, I suddenly felt you're leading an agency, not just a creative department. You're running a business and you are in service of clients as well as the well-being of the people that you work for. So you're kind of, I suppose I've always had this sense I'm going into battle a bit for my people to make sure that they are happy, that they get the work that they want to work on, that they are rewarded in the round by being able to make great work, by not being in uncomfortable situations, hopefully earning a decent and fair living as well. So I think just sort of and realizing it is just not about you anymore. It is just, and I think I said to this, we were chatting, weren't we? One of the great things someone's creative director said to me, actually at Goldgreen's Trott, his name was Dave Waters, who's one of the creative directors there. And he just sort of said, Kate, until you're big enough to give it away, i.e. not want my name on the piece of work I've made, to be anonymous in the process, then that's when you're ready to step up and be a leader, rather than someone who feels they need affirmation, is what he was saying. And I kind of think there is some truth in that. I think sort of leaving your ego behind when you get to a point of leadership, because we've all got them. And it's not a bad thing either. But I do think in the end, trying to realize it's not about you, it's about everyone else. That's how I think about it. But also recognizing that people want to know what they're being asked to do. So there is something where being clear, setting clear parameters, clear expectations of what success looks like for an individual as well as an agency.
I want to just jump on the thing that you said, because I find it incredible what you just said, but also very paradoxical about the fact that to be at the top, you need to leave your ego behind, which I suppose for a lot of people is the reason of getting to the top is because of the big ego of being at the top. And the thought that the only thing that will make you successful there is actually stopping thinking about yourself. How did you do it? Because as creatives, we all go for the creative job partially because we like our name on the work. And I think there is a big ego in the creative industry in general, because that's something you create. So how did you leave yours behind?
I found it really hard, and I find it hard every day sometimes when I don't find my name mentioned amongst my peers, when I kind of know I've done all the things they've done or whatever. But then I haven't wanted to court that either, because I've just felt, and I do think it's paradoxical, because I recognize that, and it's sort of, me rather than, advice for everyone to follow. But I think it comes from that's how I feel comfortable. But I also recognize that it's important for the people that work with you to feel your success in the world as well, because it makes them feel good. And also you're able to help them, and you're able to they feel proud to be part of that squad, if you like. So I recognize that, and I think I also recognize, as a woman creative leader, a time when there weren't so many. I probably didn't go out of my way to do, because I felt it was blowing my own trumpet and talking about my own ego. So I didn't go out to be a role model for people. And maybe that was actually incredibly selfish, because maybe at that time people did need to see more women in those situations. So I recognize that this isn't necessarily the way to do it, but I do think I want people to have their working experience. If I'm responsible for a place, I want them to have the best working. I want them to look back in years to come and go, that was the best working time of my life. And they wouldn't do it, and they will do it because it was about them. It was about them in a team, and it was about the collective success as well as their individual success. And I don't think they'd feel it if they went, oh, Kate went and, stood on stage and claimed all our work. It just, I don't think that's very healthy for people. But, I know other people do it differently. And it's, for me, I'm very visual. So I always think I've spent this time sort of, like you say, there's this sense you're climbing a ladder, you're getting to the top, you're getting to the summit. And I've sort of just gone, right, just invert it, so in the end, you're supporting everyone else. And maybe there is a moment where you decide to do that, where you just go, actually, I feel much more comfortable doing that.
I think that really relates to so many other things in life in general, in the industry, of the balance, choosing one versus another. And I think at every stage in your life, you make those decisions. You can't focus on everything. You can't focus on your own career and, I don't know, representing the industry and speaking engagement and everything else, because then you won't have a career. Or it could be, again, family and life. I think you might work hard at some point, but then you might reprioritize things and prioritize family a bit more. So you kind of balance it out. It doesn't mean you have to choose one and forever, but every point you need to think, at this point today or this week or this year, this is what I'm focusing on, because I want to achieve that, or I can see friends more, and therefore I will spend less time at work, and that would be the choice. And I think it's important to understand for yourself what for you is important, not what someone else pushed at you. So therefore you won't have regrets.
I think that's it. And this comes from, I guess it comes from getting old. It comes from, I had my son when I started at Saatchi's, and the reason I turned the job down 4 times was not just because it was a massive agency and I was like, am I entering into the corporate world now? And I didn't want to do it. It was a little bit of that, but actually I didn't feel I could give my 200% to the agency. And I always believed that's what that role should be, because I had always given 200%, and I couldn't see that I could do the role properly. Without doubt, my priority in my life had changed 100% to this little boy called Otto, and I just had to work that out. So when everyone said to me, we totally understand that is a priority, I felt okay about it, and we will support you in that. Christ, I'm not the only parent to be working, but I sort of felt I couldn't do both properly, and I just felt like I was going to let the agency down. And of course, as a mother, a parent, you end up knowing that you're always letting someone down. So, and you kind of got to get your head around that. But I think those are things, and they are priorities, and they are things that you start working through. And you're right. What kind of leader do you want to be? What's going to bring out the best of you and bring out the best of the people around you? None of us want to be leading something that isn't as good as it possibly can be. I think no one in that position is without desire, ambition, and drive. But I do think finding what makes you better and being a little bit more dimensionalized, if that is a word, sort of probably makes you better at it. I certainly think I became a better creative director after I became a mother, because for one, I became marginally more organized, just marginally. I did take my son to school when he was, when they went, we've broken up for holidays. I'd be like, oh, okay. And lots of stories like that, but I think we've all done that.
I suppose that's the ultimate creativity, giving birth to another human. So I think it's definitely contributes to more ideas and more creative outcomes for sure. Hire slow, fire fast. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree, probably. I mean, this is I was looking at it sort of in the corner of my eye, and I thought, well, I think I hire fast. I have a real instinct, and I'm sorry, it's not a good look, but I just feel someone or not, and it's really hard for me to change my mind. And then I really want to work through, and I think this is, I think probably all the rules of leadership say you need to act fast if something isn't working. I think that's probably my weakness. I will try and find solutions. And sometimes that's been really successful, actually. Helping someone move into somewhere slightly different, finding opportunities. I mean, I'm very lucky in my role. I get to work with lots of places around the world and also lots of capabilities. So I often think there is somewhere else. So I sort of try and work stuff through a bit and give people the chance. But I think that's probably, I'm the inverse of that.
Which is fair. I don't think there are correct answers to this question. Or what would you pick? Great team and an average idea, or great idea and an average team?
Great idea, average team. Because I think ultimately, a great idea makes a team better. Like, I think, if you start producing average work, no one ultimately feels great. That's where I'm.
Well, that's cheating. So,
but if you have a great team, I don't believe they're going to do an average idea either.
But also sometimes it's not just kind of general, but not every idea is always great. Like as an agent, as a company, you sometimes have to produce ideas that are good. They're not.
And that's one of the things that we always talk about. I always say to people, the dirty word, is compromise. And we see that as a dirty word. And actually, when you think about politics, successful politics is compromise. Compromise isn't necessarily a bad thing. And also that I always like to sort of go find something that you're going to learn about within a project, and then any project, no matter how bad, will be good. Like if you can spot something in it, if it's if you're going to try and deliver something with say new technology that you would like to learn about, or put a new team around you to work with. So it might be that the project ultimately is fairly pedestrian, but you will, and the team will maybe get something out of it in order to build on. So I think sometimes the process can be in itself a win. So I do think that, or just work with someone, collaborate with someone you wanted to collaborate with, and so it's find something within it that will be a positive.
That's a good advice. So ideal size for a creative agency. And again, there is definitely no right answer to this one. But you personally, Kate, if you had to create an agency tomorrow of any size with a magical wand, with the best people, obviously amazing team there, which size would you prefer? 2 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 50, 51 to 100, 100 to 300?
Well, what was funny at St. Luke's, we had read that gorillas sort of form these sort of relationships with only 70 other whatever they are. And so actually we thought there was actually a natural sort of grouping. So probably in the 51 to 70, it's 100, or falls within the 50, but where you can have, humans can really have a proper human relationship. So for me, that forms the right size for me, somewhere between those two. But where you really feel that you know your team, and you get to know them and work with them. So, and it's interesting, isn't it? I always say to, I was talking to someone at work the other day, and I said, why don't you, try and force yourself to work with some other people. See who you think's doing cool stuff. Go and talk to them and get yourself working with them. Ask your manager. And also, I always said, do your fantasy startup. Who are the people here that you would like to go and start a business and work with them and see, So I do think forcing people to I think working together in a human way for me is the perfect thing. So I'd probably be somewhere in the middle of 50 to 70.
Yeah, I think there are definitely more dimensions to this than just size, that's for sure. This is a very simplified poll, but it's very interesting to hear your thoughts behind each answer as well. Hire for skills and culture will follow, or hire for culture fit, skills can be learned?
I think skills can be learned. I really do. And I think, partly because if you're hiring, out of college, they clearly won't have skills, but they have something about them and an approach. So I think that is, and I think this plays to, for cultural fit, it's about the person they are. I do think that brings something really interesting. And I think I'm always looking for something I don't have. So it's a bit like, I don't want to replicate and have more of the same. So I think that is the case. Now, something that you don't have could be a skill. So it could be that. I think you can learn skills, and I think you can, give people the opportunity to learn them. Obviously, you want someone who gets something that fits in a team. If you've got a gap, if you want a creative technologist or something who's going to work really well with a narrative creative or something. So but that's, part skill, and actually the reason that they are good at that is partly because of who they are. One begets the other in a way. That's a fudge, isn't it?
Yeah, but what about senior positions? Because now you're at a role where you have to hire a lot of senior people, and I talk at the junior level. You can't expect any skills, and they can be learned in a month if you need to.
Yeah, senior is, I sort of take it, it's about the work and how people talk about the work initially. So, I would not be hiring people that I didn't admire the sort of work they'd been attached to. I think that's one of our luxuries in the creative industry, that there is this thing that we make, or a part of, that we make things, we produce things, we put things out in the world. And so there is an opportunity so I'm drawn to people who are associated with the sort of work that I find interesting and amazing, and sort of understand that is in their kind of gene pool, that they've kind of got that memory muscle to do that type of work, because that might be something you try and bring in, So I think that's interesting. And I think if you are bringing, like the creative director I hired in London a while ago, I literally I think I spoke to people in Australia, in South America, in Argentina, in Brazil, in South Africa, in Singapore, in the US. I whittled it down to 4 people. 2 were Brazilian, 1 was Argentinian, and 1 was American. And I went over to the States, and then headhunter said, "Oh, there's one other person who doesn't want the job, has just left. They don't really know what they're doing. They'd quite like to just meet you for coffee." And of course, I'd spent 6 months doing due diligence. I'd sat down with Guillermo. I fell in love with him. I just said, "You're the person." Totally irrational, but he was culturally right. He had drive, he had energy, he had his work was great, but it was his personality of how he wanted to make work, and the energy, that I just thought, that's what we need.
I love this story. This is brilliant.
No, I just think everything I do is wrong. So please don't. I've just found myself just saying yes to things and enjoying the ride, really.
Well, clearly you're doing wrong things right to get to where you are and achieve everything that you've done. So whatever that recipe is, it's the right recipe of wrong things. So I love it. What do you think is number one responsibility for a chief creative officer? Is it winning project and bringing revenue? Is it creating vision for creative team, pushing quality of the creative work, hiring great talent, creating culture that supports great ideas, overseeing team operations and budgets, or anticipating future direction of the industry? You can think about it.
I think it's, as you say, what's the number one priority? Because actually it is all of those things, isn't it? And which is why you've got them on there. And they are all the things all of us are, all of us on this call are wrestling with. You almost have this little graphic equalizer, don't you, of balancing out, and that's your job all the time, balancing out, the hiring, the money, I do think a vision, I do think, but I don't think it's for the creative team. I think it's for the whole business. I think with that will mean that you're pushing, you're setting the North Star. Then I think you can't leave people to that. Then you've got to help, because I always say it's like an elastic band. If you step forward to your vision, you can either just let it ping back, or you have to bring that elastic band with you. So it is a bit of, if you set that vision, how do you then bring people with you and, raise that quality? So I do think then culture really plays, and they're the two. I agree with the poll, really. Your two strong ones there feel like, for me, creating the vision and creating the culture.
Brilliant. And interestingly, the least popular answers were hiring great talent and overseeing team operations and budget. No one likes budgets in this call. And winning projects and bringing revenue. Actually, I want to argue with that one, because I think, especially at the C level, that must become at least one of the external priorities that you have. You personally might not feel that is a priority.
I agree. And I think it's when you sort of say, and this conversation is about shifting from creative director to chief creative officer, or in many ways that sort of responsibility where some of us see ourselves from creative to CEO type roles. And I think for me, one of the real shifts has been in understanding my partnership very often now is with my client. And so you sort of step outside the infrastructure of the agency and recognize that, a lot of what I do is that my partnership with my clients and being their partner, in order that then, that the agency has those projects to work on and it's built, but also sort of helping to set the visions, not for your own business, but for their business. I think you're absolutely right to call that. It's, there's a sense as a creative director, you are working with the creative teams, you're setting the vision. I think that shift as a CCO goes into creating culture for the agency, not just the creative, and then I do think your responsibility does become a bit more operational, and having a sort of, I can read a spreadsheet, but I can't say I enjoy it. But I did offer to do a job swap with our financial director once, and he said, well, what you do? I said, I'd put it all on black. And he said, okay, we're not doing that job swap.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for bringing your perspective to this poll, and definitely great to debate those points, because I don't think there is a right way to do it, but I think it's interesting to hear everyone's perspective, and it is a balance, and it's an everyday balance of juggling different responsibilities. Kind of reflects how difficult the job is. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the role of chairwoman as well, because you're not just a creative officer, chief creative officer, you're also a chairwoman, and that's a complete mystery to me. So tell me more. What does it mean to be a chairwoman?
It's a mystery to me as well. So the role of chair is very different in different organizations, and it has a very meaningful and operational role in lots of organizations. I think within the creative community and creative businesses, it's often a role that is allocated as symbolism in one way, to say that that role of CCO or creative, an individual who has had a career as a creative person, is at the center of the business, and so that opinion is important to that business. I think that's one of the reasons that you find often a creative leader as in that chair role. And so it's a bit different to other businesses in terms of the role. It is about inspiration, I think. It is about setting a vision and setting culture, but it's about sort of convening people around some of those things as well. It is different. It's a job of influence rather than ruling with a sort of a spreadsheet and a P&L in many ways. So it's about what is important to the business, what we believe our product is, how we make it better, how we create the best culture in order that we produce the most dynamic and exciting work, and how we recognize our role. I do think there is a sort of how we position ourselves in the industry. And I can see, some of the comments about, some of these things do sit with a CEO rather than a creative officer. And I think you're absolutely right. But I think there is a sort of sense where if you are in a creative business, having the creative perspective as someone who's operationally running the business as well is helpful. I've always felt that everything works better in partnership. So I have to say that the title doesn't sit particularly comfortably with me, but I think pretty much I've got it because I'm I'm the oldest woman standing, if you like. So at some point, if you stick around long enough, someone will make you chairwoman. That's the way I see it. But it is something where I realised I had to change. It was interesting. It was the only moment in my career where I've sought coaching, because I recognised I needed to behave a bit differently. And I recognized that what had got me there was not going to get me where I now needed to be, in terms of being someone that the whole of the agency could feel I represented, as well as the creatives and the creative work, So I did seek some support on how I should behave, actually, because I have probably always thrived on chaos, which isn't great as a chair. To create a culture of chaos, it's not a good look. So it were things like that I did. I sort of sought some sessions to just talk stuff through, and I found that was helpful. It sort of managed to. I always think my brain is like a big squiggle, and it managed to pull some of those strands out and make sense of them, and help me organize my thoughts and what I wanted to do. And really what I learned to do is plan a little bit more, be a bit more thoughtful and respectful of people's time, make sure I responded to things as they came in rather than sit on them because I was affecting other people. So I just learned to be a bit more responsible and recognize the effect I had on other people, which I suppose I'd never really spent the time to think about, and therefore how I should behave so that people felt I was being respectful to their time and their contribution.
This is incredible that you brought it up, and especially around coaching and the kind of the new behaviors that you had to find. And as you said, what you got you here won't get you to the next stage. And it's very hard to suddenly change what has been successful for so long. And I appreciate you sharing things that you had to change. And I think creativity and chaos do come together very nicely. And I think at the senior level, you have to figure out. Could you actually, I'm very curious specifically about the point that you mentioned, because I think I'm not the only one who will say that I would struggle with the same of responding to people and considering how much responsibility is on anyone at a leadership position already, responding to lots of things on time. So any life hacks of how did you figure out how to respond to people on time with everything that you have on your plate?
Look, I and people will laugh if they work with me, because I probably, I don't do what I preach, but I try to. which is just get back to people sort of instantly, even if you don't have a response, say, to just say, I've got it and I'll get back to you. To have the help of people around you that can, and sort of that you let them into your world a bit so that they can operate with you and support you. I always said to my assistant that you're kind of me when I'm not there. And so there's some behaviors that I feel uncomfortable with you being like, and some that, you know, because I wouldn't do that, you know. So I think it's some of those things. And I think this is where I've learned to set clear roles and responsibilities, which, as I say, none of this came naturally to me at all. And to really understand the power you have in a room and try and be comfortable with that or use it properly. Learned to be the quietest person in the room rather than the noisiest, because I enjoy being in the moment and I live in the moment. And I think lots of how I deal with things are very much, I don't think about tomorrow or yesterday, I think about now. Actually thinking, well, maybe I should think a bit about tomorrow. You know, things like that. So I think it was just a stop. And another thing I learned was I would jump from one thing to another. And because I'm quite good in the moment, I was unprepared and I didn't get the most out of situations if I was having to lead it and set agendas. So I learned to do that. And then actually post sort of meetings or things, I would take 10 minutes just to go and get a coffee and then process it in my head so that it sort of landed with actions that I thought I could do, rather than what I would always in the past do is just move on to the next one and forget, just move on. So it was just becoming more disciplined, really.
These are amazing tips. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Look, months of coaching saved. All the useful things from Kate directly. Hayden is asking, you mentioned the oxymoron of super competitive spaces and encouraging people to feel free to fail. How do you deal with failure at Saatchi?
I think it's a really good question, because culturally, Saatchi's was an environment that was a bit of a shock pool, you know, so it was quite an aggressive culture. So how do we deal with it? I think what I would say is provide the safety net. So actually, the truth is no one will ever fail, because there's always a safety net, and you provide that sort of sense that if, you know, what does failure really look like? Ultimately, you know, like I said, making people feel responsible, but not ultimately leaving them out on their own. And I do think providing a sense of security means that then people feel more comfortable with being experimental. But ultimately, you're going to pick, you and the team will pick it up. And ultimately, you will take the rap, you know. So I think that is the fine line. So failure, it is really hard. You know, you get bad news, you pitch for something, you don't get it. Actually, what you do is you spend some time going, let's look at why we didn't do that. Equally, let's look at when you have successes, let's analyze why we had a success as well. You know, so some of it is quite good. It's maybe having a moment to just grieve a bit for a failure, and then just go, right, what are the things that we can learn? You know, what I do believe, and I think we all probably can look back and go, it's when we've had failures that we've learned the most, because it's pretty raw and you kind of pick through it. And interestingly, you don't do that when you have successes. So you probably learn more from failures than you do successes. And maybe we should learn a bit about that. Just actually look at our successes so we can learn from those as well. But I think don't to say it is okay, but, you know, make sure people always feel that they're not being exposed, so that there is a sort of sense that actually failure will be everyone's failure.
This is brilliant. And I love how you talk about providing the safety that, failure won't feel like a failure. I think this is a great perspective. Anna is asking, what would be your best advice to move from senior creative to more creative leadership role?
I think it's such a good question, that. And you know, one of the things I think I think maybe it's unique to sort of our industry, but there's a sense that your career needs to sort of go into these leadership roles to be from a creative to a creative director, from a creative director to a chief creative officer, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think they are fundamentally quite different skills. And so I'd really, I think it's good to think about what are your core skills, because I sort of realized that I just loved sort of the things that I was being exposed to by being a creative director. And I realized I was actually pretty average as a creative. And there's so many people that were better than me. And but what my copywriting partner hated the role of creative leader. And he was a genius writer. And actually, but he felt the need to be doing those roles that he didn't enjoy, and therefore wasn't doing what he was really good at. So we talk a bit at work about playing in position. I think it is working out what is your superpower strength and working with it. And if giving it a go into creative leadership it's sort of this, as I say, being a bit selfless. You do move away from some of the craft as a creative, but you gain so much with the sort of being in a role of directing stuff. I personally love sort of the start of a process, the sort of really wrestling with a fundamental problem, and I love the fact that sort of as a creative leader, you're often the first up to get the problem full on from a client. You're probably one of the first team to go into the mess. And I really like that, trying to work through that. So I think there's different things that you find, and you'll see it around you, but you will leave behind some of the craft that you love, but you will gain a sort of sense of collectivism, a sense of in many ways, trying to get confidence in your judgment as well, because that's, I had to learn to be much better editor of stuff, of myself. Obviously haven't displayed that today, but I think sort of being quite, one of the jobs of a creative is to be expansive, to invent, to originate, and one of the jobs of a leader is almost to distill and get and simplify, and so they're quite different almost behaviors of the brain that you kind of learn as well. There's a freedom that comes from that expansive thinking, and there is a sort of discipline that you have to apply to creative leadership, I think. And you are dealing with people more than just ideas.
This is brilliant perspective, and actually it relates to the conversation we had with Fede Garcia as part of this leadership series, and he mentioned a wonderful story as a creative director that he moved to Tokyo and he didn't speak Japanese, and he had to distill his feedback and everything to the shortest amount of words that definitely will be translated correctly. And he had said that was the best skill to learn as a creative leader, because you do need to be able to distill what you're trying to communicate to your client, partners, designers, team, to the easiest and most comprehensive sentences and words.
That's such good advice, because I think this is it. It's this, how can I be the most succinct, the most useful, the most clear? And so it is being thoughtful about that.
And actually, on a practical note, just to follow up from this conversation, so let's say you've got all the skills, you realize you are good with people, you want to do this, you're great at it. Like, how, from the technical perspective, you ask to become a creative director or become one? Like, any advice on that when someone is like, I'm ready, I want to do this?
Sometimes whether you are being reviewed or whether you're reviewing, I think but one of the things I often do is talk to people about, what their next 12 years, what their next 3 years look like, how they would see, and if they do say, I would like to make that, I would like to make that jump, and I think it is a jump. Sometimes I go, right, what are the things we want to put in place? We want to make sure you've run a project. We want to make sure that you've done a pitch, or, what are the things that will arm you for that kind of responsibility? We want to give you a big client that you just have autonomy on. What are those things? Talking about safe, it's kind of, what are those stepping stones to it? And so, if you want to do it, I'd ask for those things. Can I have autonomy on running an account or a project? Can I have responsibility for other creatives? And say, and being clear about what you would like. Because I always found as well, when I would review people, that sometimes I'd sort of, and it sounds awful, but I'd prepare them for leaving as well, because sometimes you have to leave to do it. You can't do it within your organization. And sometimes that's where you make your personal shift, because when you turn up somewhere else in a new role, people are prepared to believe you are that role because they haven't seen you in your past role. So sometimes it's a bit easier to do it like that as well. You can slightly invent yourself. And it's not because you're being a fake, it's because you don't have the baggage of people having seen what you have previously been.
Love it. Inventing new identities, like moving to a new school and a different person. I want to finish with one question that we ask all of our amazing creative leaders, which is a little bit philosophical. So, Kate, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Well, I just think I think given right now, that's very hard, a very difficult thing to change, because I think we're facing so many sort of forces at the moment that are pretty awful and terrible. So it seems rather self-indulgent. I really would like to see a much more inclusive and diverse industry. And I feel that we are way too slow to make our industry as dynamic and exciting with representation of difference. So I think that would be, it sounds a bit like, but I think that would be, because I think we would just be that much better. That's why.
And I think you've been such an incredible, you've been doing such an incredible contribution to that by inspiring people, by talking about your role and your career. And as you said many times, it's a lot about visibility, and it is about seeing people that look like you, that talk like you, that have similar passions as you, and that's what will make you want to go in a particular role or follow a career path. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing your personal thoughts and being very authentic to who you are, because that definitely, I could relate to so many things that you were saying, that I really appreciate you sharing everything that you've experienced. And thank you for finding time for these conversations, for mentorship, for everything that you do for the industry. That definitely.
Oh, very, very kind words. And thank you for being such a brilliant host. Bye-bye.